So, when you walk into a theater, there is this very distinct moment when the heavy velvet curtain rises.
Right, the house lights go down.
Exactly. The stage lights come up, and instantly, without a single word even being spoken, you receive a signal. You're being told you are leaving the factual, historical world.
Mm-hmm. You're entering a realm of pure imagination.
Yeah, everything that happens next is understood to be a play or a dream, it's a hypothetical. And today, we are exploring how the English language attempts to build that exact same velvet curtain using grammar.
Specifically, we're looking at the second conditional, right?
Yes, exactly. These specific structures we use to talk about unreal or hypothetical present and future scenarios. And the core question we are looking at is the tension between prescriptive grammatical rules and descriptive linguistic reality.
The classic battle.
It really is, and I'll be arguing that strict adherence to the traditional prescriptive structural formulas of the second conditional provides this necessary conceptual clarity. It perfectly separates a hypothetical dream from historical reality.
And I will be arguing from the descriptive perspective, basically making the case that rigid adherence to these textbook formulas completely ignores how native speakers actually use the language today. I mean, functional communication and context constantly override formal structural purity.
Well, to start us off, I think we have to look at why this structural purity matters so deeply in the first place. When we use the second conditional, we're usually dealing with situations that have a 1 to 5% probability of happening.
Or, let's be real, a 0% probability.
Right. 0%, and that requires a highly specific mathematical precision in the language to communicate that distinct unlikelihood. The fundamental structure we're taught is if plus the simple past in the condition and would, could, or might plus the base verb in the result.
So like, if I won the lottery, I would buy a mansion.
Exactly. That baseline formula is an essential anchor. Without it, the logic of the sentence just collapses, and we fall into this trap of overcomplication.
Overcomplication in what sense? Because look, from where I sit, the prescriptive rule itself is the overcomplication.
I mean overcomplication in how we attempt to signal the unreal. When language learners come from a background with heavily conjugated, distinct subjunctive forms.
Like Spanish, right, with hiciera or hubiera hecho.
Yes, perfect example. Their brains naturally try to map that complex grammatical weight directly onto English. It's a linguistic habit called calking, and so they end up stacking conditionals and giving us messy, fractured sentences like, if I would know that, I wouldn't tell you.
Ah, I see what you mean. Stacking the woods.
Right. By insisting on a bare, simple past verb for the condition, just did or knew, we create a distinct, elegant firewall between the cause and the effect.
I mean, I understand the desire for an elegant firewall, especially in like a classroom setting, but mathematical precision sounds great on paper until you listen to how human beings actually interact.
You don't think humans are precise?
Rarely. Language is defined by its real-world application. Let's just look at the reality of spoken English across the globe. Saying if I was you instead of the strictly mandated if I were you is incredibly common.
Common, sure, but
And completely functional. If we look at how the language actually breathes, insisting that everyone must strictly adhere to the traditional subjunctive form starts to look like an exercise in nostalgia. The unlikelihood of the scenario is already built into the premise.
well, I don't think it's nostalgia to want our words to accurately reflect our reality. Let's drill down into that specific point you just raised, because the were versus was distinction is the perfect battleground for this.
Let's do it.
The English language does something fascinating with the second conditional. It recycles the past tense to describe the unreal present. This is known as the irrealist mood. And for the verb to be, we have a single unique case where a distinction is made.
Right, using were instead of was for the first and third person singular. If I were, if he were.
Look, the imagery is great. I'll give you that. But let's look closely at the mechanics of the rest of the language. There is a glaring inconsistency in this logic.
Go ahead, how so?
For literally every other regular verb in the English language, and the vast majority of irregular ones too, we already use the exact same past simple form for both the real historical past and the unreal present.
Okay.
Think about the verb to play. Real past is, I played tennis yesterday. Unreal past is, if I played tennis right now, I would be fitter. We use played for both. There's no special, unique verb form.
That's true for regular verbs, yes.
Even irregulars, real past, I had some cake. Unreal present, I wish I had some cake. We don't have a distinct conjugation for played or had to signal your theater curtain. So why are we clinging to this idea that the verb to be absolutely must have this special form were?
Because
Every other verb in the dictionary manages just fine without one.
Because to be isn't just any verb. It is the foundational verb of existence. It is the absolute core of how we express identity, location, and state.
Sure, it's important.
It's more than important. It makes total psychological sense that the verb describing our very state of being would retain a distinct irrealist form. It differentiates actual, breathing existence from hypothetical existence.
I think you're romanticizing it a bit.
Not at all. Think of the classic Bare Naked Ladies song, If I Had $1 Million. The moment they set up that hypothetical stage, we are instantly in a world where we're buying a K-car.
A nice Reliant automobile.
Exactly. Or an exotic pet like a llama. But if we casually say, if I was a millionaire, we blur the psychological line between a factual past event, meaning at one point in my history I literally was a millionaire, and a hypothetical present.
So you're saying was is only for facts.
Yes, was belongs to history, were belongs to dreams.
But our brains are incredibly efficient engines. They seek the path of least resistance. A young native speaker today saying, if I was a millionaire, I'd buy a cheese factory, is conveying the exact same irrealist mood as someone saying, if I were a millionaire.
They might convey the mood roughly, but they lose the register.
In informal settings, the brain entirely bypasses that distinction because it realizes it isn't necessary for comprehension. The context, like the word if at the beginning of the sentence and the modal would sitting in the main clause, that does all the heavy lifting.
But that friction,
The listener is never confused. The strict were is just a historical hangover. It's an irregularity that we force students to memorize when was accomplishes the exact same goal with less cognitive friction.
I have to push back on the idea that it's just a historical hangover adding cognitive friction. It serves a very real social and pragmatic function. Preserving were preserves a specific register of formality.
Formality, sure, but not meaning.
Formality is part of meaning. When we give indirect advice in a professional setting, we say, if I were you, I would talk to the manager. It softens the blow precisely because it sounds elevated and slightly detached from reality. It creates a diplomatic buffer that was simply doesn't have.
I don't disagree that if I were you sounds more formal to our modern ears, but we have to separate a stylistic preference for formality from a strict grammatical necessity.
I don't think they're as separate as you claim.
Well, if I was you, I'd talk to the manager achieves the exact same diplomatic buffer for millions of speakers every single day. The emotional distance doesn't come from the historical vowel sound in the verb.
Then where does it come from?
It comes from the fact that you are imagining an unreal scenario. You're shifting the focus to a hypothetical situation, and that shift is what provides the politeness. The structure is doing the work, absolutely, but it doesn't require an absolute obsession with textbook purity to function in the real world.
Okay, if we accept for a moment the descriptive reality that native speakers' brains are seeking efficiency, bypassing were for was, that brings us to what I see as a much more dangerous structural breakdown.
Oh, dangerous. That's a strong word.
It is, because let's look beyond just the verb to be and examine the architecture of the condition itself, the if clause. Even if was is bleeding into the vernacular, surely the fundamental rule of the condition must hold up.
And what rule is that?
The rule is incredibly clear. Modal verbs like would do not belong in the if clause.
Uh-oh. I have a feeling you are going to draw a hard line in the sand here.
I am, because when speakers start bleeding modal verbs into the condition, the underlying logic of cause and effect fractures. Going back to our learners who calc their native grammar, if someone says, "If I would have $1 million, I would buy a house," they are stacking a result on top of a result.
Which sounds clunky, I admit.
It's worse than clunky. It creates circular logic. A simple past verb is all that is required for the condition to be set. The condition belongs on one side of the equation, and the result, featuring the would, belongs strictly on the other. They must be kept separate.
See, you're treating this no modals in the if clause rule like it's a fundamental law of physics.
In grammar, it essentially is.
But it's just not. Descriptive evidence shows that the conditional is actually highly flexible, and we break this supposed law constantly. We absolutely do use would in the if clause.
Really? In what valid, logical context could you possibly justify placing the modal of hypothetical result inside the condition?
Polite requests. It is entirely standard and grammatically correct to say, if you just fill in this form, please, we can get started. That is would sitting right there in the if clause, performing a vital social function.
Okay, but
Wait, there's more. The language bends the rule to accommodate the need for extreme politeness. Furthermore, we use could in the if clause all the time to express ability. Consider the sentence, I'd go to the beach with you if I could swim.
yes, but that's different.
Or regarding permission, I wouldn't go to bars if people could smoke inside. Modals absolutely live in the if clause.
Okay, I see exactly why that looks like a structural rule break, but it's actually an optical illusion.
An optical illusion?
Yes, let's look under the hood of those specific sentences. You're conflating different pragmatic functions with the modal of hypothetical result.
How is an illusion? The words are right there in the clause. You can hear them.
When you use would for a polite request, if you would just fill in this form, you aren't actually using the second conditional to state a hypothetical cause and effect. You're dealing with a fossilized idiom of politeness.
A fossilized idiom?
Exactly. It's essentially a truncated sentence where the true result clause is entirely implied. Like, if you would just fill in this form, I would be grateful. And regarding your second example, if I could swim, this is where the mechanics are brilliant.
I'm listening.
Could in that sentence is not acting as a modal of hypothetical result. It is literally functioning as the simple past tense of the verb can.
Meaning what exactly in practical terms?
Meaning, you are saying, if I had the ability to swim. You are using the simple past tense to establish the condition, which is exactly what the prescriptive rule demands.
Well,
It isn't violating the rule. It is adhering to it perfectly. The baseline architecture stands. The modal of hypothetical result does not belong in the clause of condition.
I mean, you're parsing the grammar very finely there.
And this isn't just about preserving elegance for its own sake. Think about environments where absolute precision is necessary. Think of legal contracts outlining corporate liability or aviation communication.
Aviation? Now we're flying planes with grammar?
Absolutely. A pilot describing an unlikely but catastrophic scenario to air traffic control needs a rigid mathematical firewall between what has happened and what might happen. If we allow the condition and the result to blur together in the name of descriptive flexibility, we introduce ambiguity where we literally cannot afford it.
Look, I hear your point about high-stakes environments,
And obviously, legal contracts require specific, highly formalized language. But if we're relying entirely on the architectural purity of a single grammar formula to prevent airplanes from crashing, we have a bigger problem.
I think you're downplaying the importance of shared structure.
Not at all. I'm just saying the precision in those scenarios doesn't actually come from keeping wood in a hermetically sealed box. It comes from the vocabulary. It comes from the choices we make in the main clause.
Walk me through how you see the main clause operating without that strict structural setup. If the if clause is a linguistic free-for-all, doesn't the entire burden of meaning suddenly fall on the result clause?
Exactly. And the result clause is perfectly equipped to handle it. Think about the variations we have at our disposal. We don't just have would, we have could, might, and even should for gentle recommendations.
Sure, the modals vary.
Right. These modals are fantastic tools because they carry the nuanced weight of probability. And it is the choice of the modal verb combined with the context of the hypothetical that does the heavy lifting for meaning, not the strict mathematical formula of the sentence.
But those variations in the main clause rely entirely on the exact degrees of probability that the textbook structure teaches us. They are not interchangeable.
No one's saying they're interchangeable.
But you're glossing over their precision. Would expresses a logical or highly expected result. Could emphasizes the opening of possibilities or options. Might means the result is practically a coin toss.
Right, that's what makes them useful.
Think of a classic example. If Peter asked Karen to marry him, she might say yes, but she might say no. We don't know her mind. That might is doing incredibly precise, delicate work.
I completely agree.
Or if someone says, if I won the lottery, I could have my own helicopter, I could live in a mansion. The could is giving us a menu of options. If we abandon the underlying rules of the conditional, we lose the exact semantic control that allows those nuances to shine.
I agree that the nuances of would, could, and might are beautiful, but they actually support the descriptive argument, not yours.
How so?
Because the meaning is created by the speaker's deliberate choice of vocabulary in the moment, adapting to the context, rather than blindly serving an architectural formula. In fact, advanced English allows us to take your pristine, structurally pure formula and completely dismantle it to serve a different communicative need.
You're referring to conditional inversion.
Yes, I am. We can completely drop the word if entirely and invert the subject and the verb. Instead of saying, if I were rich, I would travel the world, we can say, were I rich, I would travel the world. We bend the structure.
Oh, but that inversion is one of the most elegant formal structures in the English language, and it proves the exact necessity of the prescriptive rules.
Does it?
Yes, it elevates the discourse. And crucially, it relies entirely on the existence of the formal subjunctive were. You cannot invert the sentence using the descriptive was.
Well,
You cannot say, was I rich, I would travel. The language rejects it. It sounds completely wrong. The inversion is only possible because the underlying formal rule exists as a foundation.
Or it proves that flexibility is the true hallmark of mastery.
I don't see it as flexibility, I see it as structural integrity. But look at what we do with it.
We rearrange the syntax to create inversion when we want to sound highly formal in writing. We swap were for was in daily conversation when we want cognitive efficiency. We slide would into the if clause when we need to be overwhelmingly polite to a customer.
You're just listing rule breaking as a feature.
Because language is a living toolbox, not a straitjacket. Meaning survives and thrives precisely because we are allowed to adapt these conditional structures to the terrain of human interaction, rather than holding onto a map that no longer reflects the landscape.
But you must have a perfectly drawn map to even understand how far you are deviating from the path. If we only teach learners the descriptive reality, if we just throw them into a landscape where rules are broken constantly, they lose their anchor. The formalized rules of the second conditional offer a necessary framework.
Learners are incredibly adaptable, though, and teaching them the rigid rule without acknowledging the descriptive reality actually does them a huge disservice.
I don't see how giving them structure is a disservice.
Think about it. If a student memorizes that were is the only acceptable mathematically pure form, and then they travel to London or New York and hear a native speaker say, "If I was a dog, I'd sleep all day," they might think they've learned the wrong language entirely. We have to prepare them for how language actually breeds.
Well, I think we have mapped out the deep mechanics of these two perspectives quite thoroughly today. To summarize my position in light of our discussion, I believe the traditional prescriptive rules of the second conditional are the essential structural integrity of the language. Using were instead of was honors the profound psychological shift between actual existence and imaginary states. Keeping would out of the if clause and utilizing precise models in the main clause provides a conceptual clarity that serves as a vital firewall. It allows us to signal instantly that we are dealing with unreality, which is invaluable for learners and for anyone operating in environments where precision is paramount.
And my concluding perspective is that while that traditional framework serves as a helpful pedagogical baseline, the descriptive reality of English tells a much richer, more human story.
Right.
We see was readily replacing were because our brains prioritize efficiency over historical forms without any loss of comprehension. We see modals fluidly adapting across clauses to navigate complex social interactions. This demonstrates that linguistic meaning is deeply resilient. It thrives on functional communication, context, and adaptation, proving that we don't need absolute structural purity to make ourselves profoundly understood.
We certainly agree on one fundamental reality, though. The ability to explore counterfactuals, to articulate hypothetical worlds, and to step outside the bounds of our immediate history is one of the most remarkable features of human communication.
Absolutely. I mean, whether you are rigorously maintaining the subjunctive to craft a flawless legal hypothetical, or you're casually wondering if you'd buy a cheese factory if you suddenly became a millionaire, the capacity to imagine what is not and discuss it as if it could be is a triumph of the human mind.
There is undoubtedly much more to explore in the nuances of these conditional structures. It's really a fascinating intersection of logic, architecture, and imagination. Understanding both the rigid textbook mechanics and the fluid, living language allows for a much deeper appreciation of how we conceptualize reality.
Couldn't agree more.
Which leaves our listeners to decide for themselves how strictly they wish to enforce the boundaries of their own hypotheticals. Because once that velvet curtain rises on a second conditional, you are the director of that imaginary stage. Thank you for joining us.